like and subscribe.
Resumed, and for our next witness, we welcome Mr. Daniel Jean, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. Then we'll go through the list.
Very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jean, for appearing. In or around June 17, did you prepare a memorandum to the Prime Minister regarding foreign interference by the Beijing Communist regime?
A few points. First of all, I've been outside the government for 5 years. I've been out of the PCO for 5 years, so I don't have any access to my records. I don't have any access. Having said that, even if I had, I wouldn't be able to discuss a classified memo. But I don't want to be seen as trying to evade the question, so I will be clear that during my period as National Security Advisors, yes, we briefed the Prime Minister on foreign interference, China and others, because, of course, it's not only China. And we brief both in the context of larger conversations on China. We brief in the context of notes that we send, and of the growing concern that we had, but also some of our allies.
Mr. Jean, through you, Madam Chair, I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to confirm or elaborate upon the contents of any memo. I'm asking very broadly whether a memo had been prepared in June of 2017, or perhaps even if taking your point, if you could more broadly elaborate on how regularly, for example, you would brief the Prime Minister regarding interference activities by the Beijing regime in or around June of 2017 or at that time?
Well, I was in the position for 2 years, from 2016, spring of 2016 to 2018, and we had numerous conversations on China. Some of these China did refer to the subject of foreign interference, and we had notes that we sent to the Prime Minister on that time that spoke about this concern, yes. And we had other intelligence tools, as you know.
And so you had some among the concerns that you had at that time would have included, for example, Beijing officials pursuing a strategy to infiltrate or interfere with our democratic processes. That would have been a live issue in 2017?
So it's very important to see the threat of foreign interference by a country like China not something as is binary, right? It's not like it's off one day and it's on the next day. It's things that comes over time. During the period that I was in the position, our concerns were, a lot more on some of the issues like acquisition of sensitive technology, what we like to refer as economic security, and we took a number of measures that have actually allowed to provide more scrutiny on this. We had other concerns with China. Foreign interference was one of them, but it was not a period where there was signals. Like there's a reason why in 2015 the Department of Foreign Affairs decided to be more direct in putting on notice countries that they should not interfere, but there was not smoking gun. There was just like activities that we just wanted to make sure would not result in any kind of interference.
In 2017, the Beijing regime was the most sophisticated perpetrator of foreign interference activities in Canada. Would you agree with that?
I would say that at that time, we were a lot concerned about Russia as well. I mean, I've just given you a couple of the examples.
I realize that, Mr. Jean, but I asked a specific question.
But definitely, we were more and more concerned about Beijing. And on the subject of foreign interference, we were particularly watching what was happening in other countries. And you just need to go through open source to see what was happening in Australia in 2017 and what led to them to take a lot of aggressive actions.
And I asked a question, but I want to just build upon it in terms of the frequency of briefings with the Prime Minister. And I know some were oral, there were memos, and so on, but just trying to get a better understanding of how often this would happen.
Of course, there are several memos that go from the National Security Advisor to the Prime Ministers in a week but there's not going to be several on the subject of foreign interference, and certainly not just foreign interference on elections, because I want to be very clear, and if you've heard my remarks, foreign interference concerns in Canada are much broader than elections, and in fact, intimidation and surveillance of diaspora has for some time been a major concern.
Okay. Did the Prime Minister ever instruct you that there are certain topics that are not to be discussed with him?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Prime Minister and his office have always been open to any kind of threats that I wanted to bring.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Jean. Mr. Wernick, in his testimony, spoke about mechanisms in which to declassify information. Would you agree with Mr. Wernick?
I was on my way here during that part of his testimony, but the only thing that I would say, I've given you an example. Actually, I've given you two examples in my presentation. President Obama decided to do it. We can determine whether the timing and the fact it was him doing this made sense following the U.S. election. And when Canada decided to attribute to Russia,
So Mr. Jean, no. I just want to be clear. Mr. Wernick said there are existing mechanisms to declassify. Would you agree with him? Yes or no?
Yes, they are mechanisms.
Okay, thank you.
And in fact, when we decided to attribute, it means that we are declassifying some information.
Thank you.
Twice. Good evening, Mr. Jean. Earlier, you opened a door. You said we shouldn't just focus on election periods, but focus more between elections for political parties. Do you have something specific to say on that? Democracy is more than just the election. I deeply believe in democracy, and I hope that democracy is more than just an election period. Now, were you made aware of certain points? Is that a warning that you're making to us? For example, the question of intimidation of diaspora people who are trying to approach people, political or elsewhere, or questions of funding? Yes, it can be questions of funding as well. And I've read the testimonies from different people, and if I remember correctly, I think that Mr. Perrault and Ms. Sima certainly talked about the fact that the mechanisms relate strictly to the elections. Now, drawing on your experience, from all of the intelligence agencies, you receive intelligence such as the National Security Council. So you're the one who compiles all of that information, and then you report to the PMO. Is that correct? When you were in that position? Well, in our governance model, the Privy Council is the one who advises the Prime Minister. So in this role, using what I receive, I give advice within that area, and I played a coordination role with these agencies because Mr. Wernick was clear that it wasn't him. It was you who did that. Yes, absolutely is the answer. So is it reasonable to suggest that since you left, since 2018, the Prime Minister was only briefed 6 times on foreign election interference? I don't think that I can comment on that. 6 times in 4 years or 3 years on foreign interference, official briefings from the National Security Advisor. Well, it's not so much about the frequency, but making sure that the right information is there, because we've got limited time to brief the Prime Minister on certain subjects. Yes, I understand there's some hesitation there. I've heard that in your answer. It doesn't seem to be that many. Well, for example, we have briefing on China. We talk about foreign interference, but the briefing time isn't on Chinese foreign interference. So the fact that it's just been talked about 6 times doesn't seem very much. No, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to put another series of questions to you, which are hypothetical in nature. If, for example, the CSIS had prepared documents which gave intelligence on diplomats that were acting on behalf of a foreign state to support a political party candidate in an election, is that something that the National Security Advisor would have told the PMO about? Well, that's very hypothetical. Yes, because when we deal with intelligence, as my former colleague, Mr. Vigneault, has said, first of all, we have to check it out before we pass it on. So if we think that the information is reliable, and I really would encourage you to read this, but if it is reliable, then if it's important for the Prime Minister to know this, which can allow certain action to be taken, then yes. Mr. Wernick also said that it wasn't up to him nor the Privy Council to take action, but then he said that it was also the role of the National Security Advisor who had the authority to engage action. Is that correct? The National Security Advisor does not have authority. He doesn't actually take action. It's the agencies that take action. The National Security Advisor will put the agencies together to have a discussion to see whether there's something there which would justify them to have action within their competence network. The National Security Advisor will decide whether it's important to notify the Prime Minister and at least keep them informed, but it's not the National Security Advisor that takes the action. Well, I was quite surprised because Mr. Wernick said something rather different, where he said that the National Security Advisor came from the top down through the National Security Advisor. Yes, absolutely information, but now you're talking about action. That's different. Well, it was information to take action. That was the question that we put to Mr. Wernick. Let's be quite clear when it talks about bringing information to the Prime Minister. If it's credible and reliable, and if the Prime Minister has to know it, then of course it's the National Security Advisor. But that's different from taking action. If hypothetically a foreign state, this is my last one, Mr. Jean, if we learn through an agent that decides to render public his dissatisfaction because it's not going so fast as we've seen in one operation. So how is a National Security Advisor going to react to that type of publication? I have read the letter that was written by that man to the Globe and Mail, okay? And when we read his letter, he's saying himself that he's a bit disappointed about what's happening because it's not what he wanted. Now, I cannot support that type of approach. There's different means. When we have discussions on intelligence internally, as a senior person, we accept being challenged. It is possible to have that sort of discussion. What I'm very, very afraid about in terms of the need to refine our measures is that when we get to the heart of the matter, and if we see that, as many people have already said, if we didn't really need to take action, is that actually going to tarnish CSIS or wherever the leak came from? Because we don't know where the leak came from, but is it going to tarnish the CSIS and make it even more difficult to actually get the right tools? We have to remember that when the CSIS was created back in 1984, it came with certain constraints. I could talk about that with another question.
Monsieur Jean, will you pretend like I have a coupon and give me 5 extra minutes of your time tonight? That would be excellent. Then I will not take some time away from Mr. Culkins. 5 minutes to you, and then 5 minutes to Mr. Trimble.
As Monsieur Fergus knows, the only thing is you're keeping me from knowing what our local team, which is right now ranked number 1 in Canada, that gets no Olympic, whether they're doing well. But
somebody could look that up.
Far be it from me to interfere with the operations of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. But Mr. Jean, a question I have for you. I know you can't speak to the specifics of the June 2017 memo, and I'm sure you know which memo I'm referring to, but can you help this committee understand how often it would be that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff would personally ask you to prepare a memorandum for the Prime Minister?
I mean, you can't, first of all, during my term as NSIA, the staff of the Prime Minister's office, including senior staff, regularly attended weekly sessions with the head of the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat. And when they saw that they things that could be of interest, they certainly expressed an interest in having more information. So that could happen in the exchanges. That could happen in the context of a briefing that I was giving, let's say, on China. And I would say we're seeing more and more challenges in terms of foreign interference. Would it be possible to get more information on that? But at the end of the day, you decide what information you're going to bring to Prime Minister and what advice you're going to give the Prime Minister.
If that's the case, then what you're telling this committee is you pushed information to the Prime Minister's office, and the only time they requested information was in follow-up to information that you pushed up the chain.
No, that's not what I said. As I said, through the daily intelligence brief, to the regular general intelligence briefing that they would attend, sometimes they would say, oh, that is very interesting. Would it be possible?
So other than the daily intelligence brief, they would ask for follow-ups. There was no special requests other than that type of scenario. Is that correct?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure there's a number of files, not just this file, where we would have a conversation and they would say, we think it's important that the Prime Minister would be brief on this, and we would say, yeah, sure.
Could you give us any indication of how often you were asked by anybody senior in the PMO to brief the PM on foreign interference?
To brief the PMO on?
To brief the Prime Minister on foreign interference.
I wouldn't recall. I wouldn't know.
Well, was foreign interference a frequent topic of discussion when you were briefing on national security, or was it an infrequent topic? How frequent was it as a topic?
So, national security is a big business. There are a lot of things at play.
Yep.
So, foreign interference came in the context of conversations regularly, but specific briefings on foreign interference, a lot fewer.
Okay. But they did happen.
They did happen.
The spring of 2017 was when Ms. Telford's close friend, Ms. Ng, was elected to Parliament, replacing John McCallum, a previous MP who departed actually to become the ambassador to China. Was there, in your role as the National Security Advisor, was there anything about that particular by-election that you can recall which provoked any foreign interference concerns? Because there is some discussions in public media about the involvement of Michael Chan, who was Mary Ng's campaign chair during that by-election.
Wouldn't be appropriate for me to speak about this one way or the other, even if it did.
So you can't even tell us if a conversation happened? I'm not asking for intimate details, but was there any concerns? Because we do have
no, because
we have
you're entering in real specifics, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to talk about this in an open forum.
In your opening statement, you said there was complaints about the 2015 warning given to embassies not to interfere in that year's federal election. Was it a foreign government, or was it more of a domestic consideration, or do you remember who complained?
And I use that example just to show how society evolved. In 2015, when we issued that notice, we had a few criticism. It was in the media, and they were primarily retired former diplomats, senior diplomats, who felt that this was insensitive to go that directly about putting foreign missions on contact.
In your earlier testimony today, you talked about the importance of foreign actors or foreign states being able to survey or do surveillance on or conduct intimidation operations on diasporas within Canada. I'm assuming that also means the Chinese-Canadian diaspora. Is that correct?
It means China. Any diaspora should not be subject to undue surveillance or intimidation by a foreign state.
Is it true that the law in China is that they will never extradite a national?
I'm not sure.
Do I have more time, Madam Chair, or no? Because it was about to get interesting, Madam Chair.